Hey guys, so for today's video, I'm going to be giving you my top 3 fastest growing plants, so roll the intro. Alright, so all of the plants that I'm about to mention are from this tank right here. If you want to know more about this tank, you can check out the video right there, I think. That's the right corner. Like I said, all of the plants I have in this tank right here, and they're all really beginner-friendly plants. All you really need to keep them is a light. But anyways, the first fastest growing plant, and it's probably the fastest growing plant that I can think of, is Hornwort. So here is Hornwort, and you can see it has a very unique kind of leaf pattern to it. It almost looks like pine needles from a pine tree. And about this plant right here, it is a floating plant, and that just means that it can just float up on the surface of your tank and you don't need to plant it in the substrate. This plant actually doesn't grow any roots, and you can just keep it floating at the top of your tank. You can also take it and wedge it between some rocks or driftwood, but if you end up planting it down in the gravel or your substrate, the part that you planted will rot because it's not getting any light, and it tends to break off from the rotten part and just float up anyways. So I wouldn't recommend planting it, and I found that it does best when it's just wedged between objects. And this plant is a really low demanding plant. All you need is light and it will grow. But I would recommend a somewhat decent light, because if it doesn't get enough light, all of the little pine needles and stuff will fall off and die, and it just gets everywhere in your tank and it's just a mess. So just make sure you have good lighting. So the next plant on my list is Elodia or Anacharis. It goes by many different names, but Elodia and Anacharis are some of the most common. So here is Elodia. You can see it looks kind of similar to Hornwort, in which it kind of has like a unique leaf pattern, almost like pine needles, but the leaves are a little bit broader. So like I said, Elodia is very similar to Hornwort. Elodia is also a floating plant. You can just have it floating in the water column and it can absorb nutrients straight from there. Except Elodia can actually grow roots, which is pretty nice, and I found that it grows a lot faster when it's rooted down in the substrate. So a fun fact about Elodia is each leaf on Elodia is actually only a few cells thick. So if you stick it underneath a microscope, you can get a good look of what the cell looks like. You can see the chloroplast moving around, which I think is really awesome. Alright, and my final plant that I want to mention is Dwarf Sag or Dwarf Sagittaria. I'm not going to grab this one out of the tank because it's all the way down at the bottom and I don't want to get my arm wet. So Dwarf Sagittaria or Dwarf Sag only grows in the substrate. It looks similar to Jungle Val, if you've ever seen that. It's kind of a miniature version of it. And the cool thing about this plant is if you provide super high lighting for it, the leaves only get around 1 inch to 2 inches tall. And if you have low light in your tank, then the leaves will stretch up all the way to the light and it will get really long. Some of the leaves on my plants are about 1 foot long. And how these plants propagate is they send out little runners in the substrate or above it, and it just sprouts up a whole new plant. And this plant is a carpeting plant, in which this just means that it'll spread around your gravel and wherever it really can and just create a carpet of this plant, which is what it's doing in my tank right now. It just spreads all throughout the gravel at the bottom. Now I know I only said I'd give you 3, but I'm actually going to give you a 4th one that I just thought of, and it's duckweed. This stuff grows crazy, and they're like little mini lily pads. Now you have to be careful with this plant. It grows very fast, just like Hornwort, and it will cover the entire top of your tank, and it will prevent light from passing through down to your other plants in your tank. And also another warning about this tank: if you ever add it to your tank, you're probably never gonna get rid of it. You're gonna try your best to scoop it all out, and if you just miss one little tiny piece of duckweed, it just multiplies. So a warning on that. You'll probably never get rid of it. So like I said, all of these plants will do just fine if you provide a light. But if you really want these plants to grow, you can add some fertilizer. I just use some Flourish. Yeah, Flourish. And when I'm using this fertilizer, I have to trim the plants back almost every week because they grow so fast. So I hope you guys like this video, and if you enjoyed it and want to see more fish tank content, you can consider subscribing. Also, if you want to see even more of my fish tanks, you can give me a follow on Instagram at Barry's Aquarium. And with that, I will see you guys on the next video.